Chapter 90, Callum. My dad said something once about the Liberation Militia. He said that once they had you, they never let you go. I learned exactly what he meant over the next couple of years. I started off as little more than the T-boy, but I was eager and keen. I soon worked my way up the ranks. I moved from T-boy to grunt, following the orders of anyone and everyone in my cell of 6 men and 3 women. From grunt, I moved down to private and on up the ranks until I earned the rank of sergeant and joined a new cell. Sergeant at 19, I was proud of that. And while I was working my way up the LM ranks, I took the time to take care of some personal business, namely Dion Fernandez, Lola Jordan, and Joanne Longshadow, the ones at Eathcroft who'd beaten up Seffi for sitting with me, for being with me, for not knowing her place, which was miles above mine. With the contacts and resources now at my disposal, it wasn't difficult to find out where they lived. I made it my business to find out all about them, their home lives, their family circumstances, their likes and dislikes, everything. If there's one thing that being in the LM taught me, it was that everyone had a weakness. You just had to know where and how to look for it. I dealt with each of them in their turn. Lola first, then Joanne. Dion last, but by no means least. I took particular trouble to make sure that Dion suffered, just as she made Seffi suffer. They say that revenge is a dish served cold, and they're right. I served it icy cold, and I lost more of myself as I did so. But that was okay, because the Callum Ryan McGregor, who loved to sit on the beach and watch the sun go down, didn't exist anymore. He'd been taken, and I'd been left in his place. A poor trade, but an inevitable one. In the new cell, there were 4 of us all together. Pete, Morgan, Layla, and me. Pete was in charge. We called him the quiet one. He didn't say much, but he smiled a lot. I was careful to watch my back around him. He was deadly with a knife, and had at least 4 that I knew about always stashed on him somewhere. Morgan was 20 and the joker of the pack. He was our computer expert and the best driver in any LM cell for miles around. Leela was my age and knew everything there was to know about breaking into buildings and blowing stuff up. She'd been my call. One evening, just a couple months ago after my 18th birthday, I'd been sitting sipping a coffee outside a cafe in the city and surreptitiously timing the guards' movements in the glass-fronted office block opposite when I first spotted her. It was one of those cafes that likes to pretend it's très chic by serving croissants at night and coffee that's all foam and no flavor, or liquid for that matter. The evening was quite chilly, so apart from me, there were only 3 other men huddled at a table about 2 yards away from me. Layla came over to me first. Spare some change for a coffee? I looked at her and shook my head. She moved on to the only other occupied table outside the cafe. Spare some change, please? Here's 5 quid, one of the morons at the table waved it under her nose. What will you do for it? I turned to watch, interested to see what she'd do next. Well, the man winked at his friend and continued to wave the money under Layla's nose. I could tell from her tense stance that she was furiously angry, but the guy who was showing off to his mate was too thick-headed to realize it. Or maybe he just didn't care. Layla lurched forward to try and snatch the money from the moron's hand, but he snatched it back. Come on, Tart, you can do better than that. What did you call me? Layla asked softly. I moved my coffee to the other side of my table. If the shoe fits, the moron laughed and his friends joined in. Stand up and I'll show you what I'll do for that $5, Layla said silkily. And like a jackass, the man stood up. Seconds later, he was double over after Leela's foot made painful contact with his goodies. You were right, the shoe does fit, Leela hissed at him, snatching the 5 pounds out of his unresisting fingers. Moron number 1 collapsed on the floor, coughing his guts out. Morons 2 and 3 should have remained seated, but they decided to go for it. Big mistake. It took less than 15 seconds for Layla to sort those 2 out. By the time she finished, they were all rolling on the ground like human bowling pins. I waved to one of the waitresses inside the cafe, who was watching the proceedings with horror. He edged out, giving Lila a wide berth. My bill, please, I told him. I turned to Layla. Would you like to have dinner with me? Layla spun around, belligerence all over her face. Are you talking to me? Yes. Would you like a dinner? Somewhere away from here, though. The police will be here in about 5 minutes. She looked me up and down, and more than once before she answered, Yeah, okay then. I glanced in the cafe, but my waiter was taking his time. So guessing at the price and doubling it, I put my money down on the table. We strolled off down the road toward a good meat restaurant I knew. I'd been poor for too long to be a vegetarian, and as we walked along, Leela never said a word. When we got to the restaurant, she sat down on her chair, poised to leap straight into her feet if the situation demanded it. 2 menus, please, I said to the waitress. I'm Callum, I told my new companion, holding out my hand. Layla, she replied, digging her hands deeper into her pockets. And that was the beginning of our friendship. It had taken me a while to get to know her, but it was well worth the effort. She and I had a similar sense of humor, which always helps. I was the one who recommended that she be taken under our wing. She'd been on her own for a long time before she joined our cell, so she was ridiculously grateful at belonging to the LM. So grateful that she suggested becoming my lover. It was a couple of months later when we were held up in one of our safe houses, waiting for Pete and Morgan to return from a reconnaissance trip. Thanks for the offer, I told her, and I'm very, very flattered, but I've only got room for one thing in my life now, and that's work. You're sure? She asked. I nodded. To my surprise, Layla put her hands on my shoulders and kissed me. It was nice too, but that's all it was. You sure you won't change your mind? I'm sure, I smiled. Well, the offer is always open, she shrugged. I'll remember that. And we both carried on cleaning our field guns. I didn't want to get involved. In fact, I didn't want any distractions, no matter how lovely they were, and Lila was lovely. She was as tall as me and super fit with dark brown, short-cropped hair, cat green eyes, and a ready smile in spite of all the crap that happened to her. Of course, Morgan and Pete couldn't believe the fact that I turned her down. I heard the two of them discussing whether or not I batted for the other side. That made me laugh wryly, but I left them to wonder. Sometimes I felt lonely enough to take Layla up on her offer, but I never did. The last thing any of us needed were lover quarrels taking our mind off what we were meant to be doing. So in a short space of time, I made quite a name for myself. I was known as the crazy one, the first one into danger and the last one out. Everyone in my cell was convinced I had nerves of steel. So much so that Pete had to take me to one side and tell me to take it a bit easier or I'd wind up dead. No one realized that that was the whole point. By the time I was 19, I'd gained my stripes and lost my soul. But a soul was unnecessary in my line of work. To make it as a grunt, I had to beat up a dagger. I ambushed one on his way home from work and knocked 7 bells out of him. To prove myself as a private, I had to take on 3 of them, but for that I was allowed to be armed. I had a knife and I'd been taught how to use it. I won that fight as well. And one of the daggers died later from his wounds. I waited for days to feel something, anything, but I never did. Confirmation, if I needed any, that I was dead inside. And to become a sergeant, well, it doesn't make any sense to dwell on it. I did what I had to do. I did the only thing I could do. I became one of the youngest sergeants in the whole of the Liberation Militia, second in command of our well-respected cell, one of the most respected and one of the most wanted. I missed my mom. I sent money to her whenever I could, but I never made any attempts to see her. It would have been too dangerous for both of us, and I never posted the money from the same place twice either. In my line of work, there was no such thing as being too careful. Poor Mum. One way or another, she'd lost all of us, through no fault of her own. I never once saw my brother. I heard he was in charge of a cell farther north. We never had any contact with each other. I was told not to expect any favors because I was Jude McGregor's brother and Ryan McGregor's son, and I didn't. I didn't expect anything. I didn't want anything. I didn't ask for anything except complete loyalty from those in my cell, and absolute obedience the couple of times I had to take charge, and I got it too. The police didn't know my identity, my real name. They didn't even know what I looked like. I was careful that way. They just had the code name of our cell, Stiletto, like the very sharp, very deadly dagger. Isn't that ironic? My cell was never given anything too onerous to do, or too dangerous for that matter. We were more of an acquisition cell than otherwise. Money, explosive guns, you name it. We did what we had to do to get it. I was on my way up, and nothing was going to get in my way. Nothing. Our cause was just. Our aim was true. A couple of months after my 19th birthday, Pete received a direct order from the LM command. They were sending a lieutenant to assess his cell's efficiency. Efficiency, my left buttock, Pete fumed. There's nothing wrong with my cell's efficiency. The rest of us could see the rage the message had put Pete in from over 3 miles away and wisely kept our distance for the rest of the day. There was no word as to when we could expect this lieutenant, and Pete was determined he or she wouldn't be able to follow any of our work or procedures. He made Layla go through our inventory with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that everything was accounted for. Pete went through our accounts himself, while Morgan and I grumbled like hell about having to clean our main headquarters in the tunnel complex beneath Salvation Park from top to bottom. We were holed up in an old access tunnel, which were no longer used by anyone but the rats. We received reasonably fresh air from the ventilation grills still scattered throughout the park, but nothing we did got rid of the permanent sewer stench. To be honest, after a couple of weeks in the tunnels, I didn't even notice the smell anymore. We weren't going to be in the tunnels for longer than a month or two, so there was no point in belly aching about it. We all just got on with it. Morgan and I made sure each tunnel was secure and our warning devices on the grills were in place and working. At last, when Pete was reasonably satisfied, we all sat down for our dinner, a takeaway meal of burgers and fries. Why isn't there anyone outside guarding the main entrance? I recognized that voice at once. I leapt up, shocked. What the hell are you doing here? Unless you're in charge here, I'd sit down and shut up if I were you, came the reply. I'm in charge. Pete stood up slowly. And you should have been expecting me. I'm your new lieutenant, said my brother Jude, and I asked you a question. Why is no one guarding the main entrance? I sat down slowly, never taking my eyes off my brother. He turned and looked at me, his eyes burning into mine, and I knew right then and there he still didn't quite trust me, and that everyone in our cell was in danger because of it.